Spotify was not the first music streaming service. I mean, do you remember Pandora?
I remember Pandora, yeah.
Before that was Napster, right? Uber was actually not the first ride-sharing company. There was Sidecar, there was Lyft. Lyft before Lyft was Zimride. I mean, Slack, does anyone remember Yammer? Skype had their own business chat at one point. And so what's so interesting about category-defining companies is they're often not the very, very first in their category. And so the first movers, they provide the market education. They seed the idea. To be a category-defining company, you kind of have to be right place, right time with the right product, but you don't necessarily have to be first. And we just see history repeating itself on that over and over again.
Hey climbers, welcome back to another episode of Climb by VSC. I'm Jay Kapoor, general partner of VSC Ventures and co-host of Climb. Every week on this show, I speak with founders, investors, and early stage experts who are helping build and scale the next generation of category defining companies. Today on the show, I'm thrilled to be joined by Bordetsky, who's a partner at NEA. Anne has previously been a serial startup operator and business executive at places like Uber and Twitter, was most recently the COO of Rival, which sold to Live Nation. At NEA, Anne invests in early stage companies such as Perplexity, Contra, Fizz, and Glacier, which we've invested in together. And you've been spending a lot of time thinking about category creation, category defining companies. And I felt like we should do something different on the show today, which is pick one topic and really look at it from a bunch of different angles. So lots for us to unpack on this idea of category creation. Before we do that, I'll just start by saying thank you so much for joining me.
I'm so glad to be here, Jay. It's been a pleasure working with you as a co-investor, and I'm a big fan of the pod, so I'm really excited to be here.
Well, let's dive in. Thank you. And before we get into the kinds of companies that you're looking at from this category creation lens, let's define for our listeners this idea of category creating company or category creation. What is it, and what are some examples from your past experience that you could give as a category creating company?
Yeah, I personally really love working with founders who are sort of in emerging categories, in white spaces, and category creating companies are all around us, right? Category creating companies are companies that, one, offer a fundamentally new and oftentimes magical user experience that really captivates us and becomes part of our daily lives. They're often companies that bundle product innovation together with business model innovation or go-to-market innovation, right? And they, category creating companies ultimately sort of emerge in spaces that are really novel, and they claim categories and kind of lead them over time. And so category creators are Uber, Airbnb, Instagram, Slack, Tesla. Pretty much every iconic tech company that you can think of is actually a category creator. And category creators are remarkable in that they are not only sort of one of a kind and kind of tend to define a particular space, but they actually end up being so much bigger than we expected because they tend to be non-obvious at the beginning, but really grow to dominate and become large companies over time. And the history of tech is actually full of category kind of disruptors and creators. And ultimately, you know, as a venture investor, that is really what we're looking for, right? A contrarian idea, an emergent technology, a disruptive new approach to a problem, but one that can then ultimately become, you know, a category in and of itself.
Yeah. I love that definition. And, you know, the interesting aspect of some of the companies you mentioned is that facsimiles to those businesses existed in the past, right? A taxi business existed before Uber. You know, hotels and maybe home sharing or couch surfing existed before Airbnb. And maybe Tesla is the one example where there weren't really that many EVs available before Tesla. But there are facsimiles that exist, and yet those markets are ripe for disruption or ripe for new categories to be created. What are the attributes of those markets that you tend to look for when you say, okay, this company could be a category creator?
There's usually a confluence around category creators. We tend to see a confluence of, one, technology shifts combined with oftentimes changes in popular culture, changes in consumer behavior. There's something happening in the world that, frankly, creates fertile ground for that idea, that product to emerge. And so it's usually at the intersection of technology shifts and consumer behavior shifts. But you're right that what we've observed historically is that, category creators, especially the ones that we tend to remember over time, that persist over time, oftentimes are actually not the first in their category, right? So Spotify was not the first music streaming service. I mean, do you remember Pandora?
I remember Pandora, yeah.
Before that was Napster, right? Uber was actually not the first ride-sharing company. There were other early entrants in San Francisco at the time. I remember this time I was in startups. Back then, there was Sidecar, there was Lyft before Lyft was Zimride. We could go on and on. I mean, Slack is another great example of this, right? Does anyone remember Yammer?
Oh my God.
Right, Yammer. And then I think Skype had their own business chat at one point. And so what's so interesting about category defining companies is they're often not the very, very first in their category. And so the first movers, they provide the market education. They seed the idea. There's always these early attempts that are kind of in and around the right idea, but don't quite work. And then the second, third, fourth, this kind of changes by category. Company tends to emerge that gets the user experience just right, that gets the business model just right, that maybe has something kind of different and viral and inherently fitting in the moment, in terms of their go-to-market or growth strategy, and it takes off. Right. But in these categories, we tend to see kind of a winner take most, if not a winner take all dynamic. And so, again, to be a category defining company, you kind of have to be right place, right time with the right product, but you don't necessarily have to be first. And we just see history repeating itself on that over and over again.
Yeah. Are there attributes of a founder that you look for when they are going after one of these categories, right? Based on your definition, it necessitates that nothing has existed before, right? The act of creating a category means either people weren't buying a product in that way, so there's a business model innovation. That technology may have never existed, so there's no models of past success. And as an investor, pattern matching is this word that gets thrown around. All of that pattern matching and all of that data recognition fails when you're talking about category creation. So let's start with the founder. What do you need to see in a founder when they're going after something where the trail has never been blazed before?
So we're seeing this today in AI, for example,
Yeah.
Right? This is exactly what investors are trying to figure out in this current wave of generative AI. What are the new categories that can be created? What do they look like? Who are the companies that can make that happen? And I think oftentimes what I look for as an investor, I think historically has been true for companies I've been part of, is that the founder has to have, frankly, imagination and vision around how the world is going to evolve, right? Look around them, observe the opportunities, figure out what Lego blocks of technology are actually available, like we see with LLMs and generative media today, and then really think about, okay, well, how might the world be different 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and how can I sort of, one, not just build a great product, but really convince the world to come with me on this journey, make it work in the market, within the reality of how the market really exists. And I think Spotify did this remarkably well for music streaming, although they were not the first. I think Uber really took off at the beginning in part because they could really just observe what was happening in the market and copy it faster and better and scale it better than anybody else. And so what I think is necessary for founders who want to take on these emergent spaces is to have really clear vision for where they want to go, a really compelling, frankly, mission and articulation of that vision, because oftentimes, it's kind of like building a movement, right? You're trying to convince people that something is possible that hasn't quite existed yet. In order to do that, you need to have kind of a missionary vision that your early employees, that your investors, that your partners, and everybody else in the ecosystem can kind of rally around, right? And so the pattern that I see and that I look for, it's less about, well, have we seen this before? And it's more about projecting forward into the future. Does a founder have a really compelling and crisp vision of how the world will be different because of what they're building? Can they magnetically attract other people to that vision? And can they realize it through sort of the skill and velocity of the product that they're building?
Yeah. How does a founder that pitches you balance between not being ambitious enough and being too pie in the sky? Because sometimes you get folks that pitch you something and they go, this is the way the world's going to be. And maybe in the room, it sounds like a great idea and they're a great, salesperson, the Adam Newman-y type. And then you go back and you look at the market and you go, what are they seeing? Like, I don't understand it. And so I always seem to find that founders have to live somewhere in the middle, but I'm curious, what are those things that you're picking up on when you're hearing a pitch from somebody that has that vision, but that still sounds achievable?
What I look for is depth.
Okay.
The consistent theme for me is founders that tend to win in the long run, even at those early stages, have thought so deeply about the space or the problem that they're trying to solve. The more questions you ask, the more context and insight you gain. They've intellectually grappled, right, with what's in front of them and what they want to create. And so oftentimes, what I look for and what I pressure test for is just depth. How well do you know this problem space? How much have you really thought about sort of different approaches or different angles to take in terms of solving the problem? And just, how intellectually curious the founder is about, building in that arena. And I find that people who have the depth, they fully sort of immerse themselves in the problem, whether or not the first sort of product attempt is the right one or the winning one. That act of immersion and full commitment to that vision is what ultimately helps them win in the long run.
Yeah. Was that the kind of similar experience you had when Perplexity came in to speak with you? And what was that kind of conversation like to say, wow, this is the vision that we can actually to get behind?
Yeah, I mean, look, the Perplexity team really wowed the entire partnership. When we first met them, I would say a year and a half ago, it was just so clear that the team had one just incredible sort of vision for how to leverage LLMs to build a truly useful product, right? Not just, something you would see in a research lab, but really, truly trying to take AI and LLMs and put it into a product that someone could use every single day. They were solving a product for themselves. And oftentimes when you do that, you tend to build something really useful. And so I think it's true that's a pattern we saw in the company as well, is just intellectually curious, really smart, skillful founders who want to build something big, who are really committed to two things. One is, building a generational company and sort of the magnitude of scale and I think company that's required to do that, but also just that commitment to the user of let's build something that's actually useful. It's meaningfully better and it can be in a user's life as a really trusted product.
Yeah. When you have a category creator, I guess in this case, they're defining kind of their own path because OpenAI exists and ChatGPT is there. And then Perplexity is saying hey, we have kind of this wedge we're going after. How much validation can you do as an investor when there isn't, again, that fully blazed trail? Can you call customers? Can you, watch hours of customer usage? What are those signals that you look for to say, I have conviction on the team. Now I need to understand if the market is accepting this.
Well, the awesome thing about backing consumer companies in general is challenging, and it's not for the faint of heart. It's not for everyone in the industry. But the beauty of consumer products is you can very clearly see whether there's user love for the product very, very early on. And for Perplexity, you could go on Twitter /X and you could just see people were just wowed by the product. The love was fanatical. When people are organically talking about you and raving about your product and no one asks them to do that, like there's something special there when the market is literally pulling the product out of you by saying, yes, I love it. I want more of this. And it was very easy to observe that. Now, sometimes we back enterprise software companies where, yeah, we are going to call customers. We're going to ask them, how they made their product choice, whether they would continue to use the product, kind of all the basic questions to test true product market fit for the customer, how they derive value from the product, et cetera. So there's definitely ways to test it. But again, the beauty of consumer is there's no room to hide. Either people love your product or they don't. And you can see that in the daily engagement metrics of a company and a product. You can measure it very easily, and you can almost always pick up a great amount of signal from just what's out there in the open web.
Yeah.
And I want to add this one other thing about Perplexity. I think it is important for category creating companies, and they are certainly one of these. They are emerging as a category creating companies, and this was clear when we first met them as well. They took an idea, something we've lived with for a very long time, which is search, right? Traditional search. You put in a question, you get 10 blue links, right? We've all kind of grown up with Google, and they flipped it around on its head to say, what could be radically better than the way that we search today? And it's an answer engine. The answer was like flipping it around on its head and saying, no, there's this new thing that can exist and that we are going to create, and it's going to be an answer engine. And it is a paradigm shift, because instead of asking the user to do all of the work and the cognitive load of, searching, through SEO and sponsored ads and all of that.
The first 10 links on Google today are ads on ads on ads.
Right.
And by the time you get to the bottom of the page, maybe you find something useful. It's a terrible experience.
Who wants to do that work, right? That's cognitive load. And we already live in a world where there's so much digital clutter around us. And so it was the vision, I think, and the frankly, courage that's required to say, hey, there's something better. It's going to be an answer engine, and it's going to give you a succinct, fast summary of the best information that's out there in the world, but deliver it to you in a way that's trustworthy, that's sourced, right, referenced, and it's verifiable, and put it into a really clean UI. And so I think that you could look at it and say, hey, it's search, so is it really new? But the experience is so radically new. The business model is different, and certainly the technology foundation on which it is being built is novel as well. And so from that, I think we'll see a category creator in the long run.
I think there's something really powerful in what you just said there in terms of the messaging aspect of it as well. Let me put my PR hat on for a second, right? It's not a search engine, it's an answer engine. I'm not searching for an answer, I'm getting an answer. And I use that almost a little bit reductively to say, I think some of the best category creators or category defining companies become that. They have that little tagline where you go, cars wherever I want it, right? Or I can stay in somebody's home, where it's like this very easy thing to like explain. And I wonder how much you think about that clarity, that messaging as part of your decision-making framework as you're evaluating these companies.
The clarity is important, but not just in the marketing and positioning of it. I think that is table stakes. The clarity of what's important to the user is also critical for building the right product and building a product that will endure and evolve over time. And Amazon is such a perfect example of this. Like, Amazon has true customer obsession, right? They want to, and they've built an amazing company on this idea that the customer comes first, the customer's experience comes first, right? Walmart famously, just as a counterexample, they're all about like, we always want to give you the lowest price. And whenever I've interacted with, executive team at Walmart, which I have, at certain points, their clarity around this is just remarkable. Like, they're like, we always want to put like the 10-cent baking soda on the shelf, something like that.
Yeah.
But, and so I think the greatest companies have that kind of clarity. Uber did have that clarity. It was, that and it permeated the product strategy and also how the company communicated. And the idea was it's the fastest way to get from point A to B. the fastest and most convenient way. I think when it comes to answer engines, what's really critical and having clarity on this is sort of speed and accuracy, right? So knowledge kind of delivered to you at the speed of, a voice prompt. And so what does that look like, right? And what do you optimize for if that's what the user really values? And so I think that clarity is just super important, but it comes from knowing the user and how they value their time and how they value your product, and then finding the right words to go along with that.
And to that point, category creation requires a level of behavior change from the consumer as well, right? Before we got on, we talked a little bit about limitless as an example of like a bet that will people want their day-to-day recorded to be able to reference back to it, right? 10 years ago, I would have said no. Today, I'm a little bit more of a believer, especially post-COVID Zoom. We're all on recorded, Otter AI and Limitless and all these things. At some point, you go, there's a tipping point in the market where it goes from non-obvious to obvious. How do you identify that tipping point? When do you kind of find that inflection and say, okay, I want to invest?
It's a really good question. Timing is such a big part of what makes the luck in the startup success story. Being early is often the same as being wrong. Being late is also bad, right? So
expensive.
So timing in the market is important. But I think it's very hard to assess as an investor. And so I think that the timing element, the way I think about it is, when an opportunity emerges, you want to back the right team, make sure they have enough runway to figure it out, right? And maybe to take multiple attempts at a problem, because you don't truly know as an investor, like, is this the exact right time? Is the market fully ready? And I think within AI right now, we're just seeing so much experimentation that in a way, I think the smart thing to do is to back amazing teams and give them the space and the opportunity to experiment and figure out what's going to work. And I think in a way, the Rewind team, now known as Limitless, is doing a phenomenal job of that. But back to behavior change, because it's such an interesting question. I've noticed this within myself. If you had asked me even a year ago, like, would I wear something on my body that would record all of my conversations so that I can then search them, right, and record them and transcribe them, I probably would have said like, ooh, I don't know, that's a little creepy, right? And what a difference a year makes, right? We've all played around with different AI products. So I think we've all gotten a lot more comfortable, a lot more educated. It doesn't seem so strange anymore. And now, when the Limitless team launched their colorful pendants, I was like, yes, like, sign me up. Absolutely.
I ordered one.
I pre-ordered one too. And not just because we're investors, but like genuinely, I'm like, okay, yes, I do want you to create my sort of digital memory and make that accessible to me. So I think behavior shift can happen very, very quickly. And I think that this is the great gift of OpenAI and ChatGPT. Again, going back to this idea that you don't have to be first, but you have to be the first to really capitalize on the consumer opportunity that's there, the product and the go-to-market opportunity in the right way. OpenAI and ChatGPT having this like huge cultural moment in the zeitgeist educated the market, right? Prepared the market for what's possible in AI. And now every other startup can just draft behind them. Draft behind them from sort of a market education standpoint, right?
Yes.
You have 100 million people who've tried ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Now are they more likely and more receptive to having a personal AI? Absolutely.
So yes. However, just to double click on that specific point, the number one pushback that I see, whether it's our companies as they're pitching the next round investors, or even companies that are pitching us, where you have to ask yourself the question, why would somebody use this and not OpenAI, right? Why, like, ChatGPT exists if you're making a purpose-built application layer on top of somebody else's engine. If you build a big enough market, why wouldn't they just be able to eat your lunch tomorrow or swipe your margin tomorrow? How do you think about that when you see these companies that are in your words, drafting behind a market that somebody else has created?
There's two things that I think are happening right now. And by the way, I don't underestimate OpenAI and ChatGPT in particular. Amazing people there, some of whom I'm friends with. So I root for their success in a way because I know that they want to have a huge impact in terms of AI. But look, I think the AI opportunity, whether it's personal assistants or digital employees or infrastructure for developers and, companies, is just massive. It's absolutely massive, right? And it's global scale. There's 6 billion devices in the world now, right? That's different, right? And so I think that there's just so much opportunity that there will be multiple, massive companies created in this time. I don't think it's a winner-take-all opportunity. And so for ChatGPT, what I would say is the reality is we as consumers, we want to have specific problems solved in our lives. And a chat experience is not necessarily sort of like default better. So I think ChatGPT is magical in many ways, right? And it is in a way training new consumer behavior, new user behavior, right? But the reality is, for mainstream consumers out there, like you just want a better way to plan your travel. You just want to, research for your school project, right, in the right way as fast as you can. You want to, order reservation at your favorite restaurant, make a song, whatever it is. And so I think that there's a lot of opportunity to create dedicated experiences that are powered by AI, but where the UI and the user experience is sort of purpose-built for that particular use case, whether it's knowledge search or it's music or it's creativity or it's, having a personal memory assistant, whatever it is. Because so much of the product magic and delight is in that user experience. And I think ChatGPT, it's just chat. So it's pretty limited and it's not going to be able to be a medium for every kind of product. And so
totally. And I agree with you there. I think there's certainly, if you are using it for a very specific purpose, you tend to find the boundaries of its abilities very quickly. And so I think the general search concept of it probably exists. And then you start to see folks that are applying it into, their industries, right? Like, and we back a lot of vertical software companies. I like to say the dirty, dusty, dangerous industries. So within those verticals, we're seeing a massive interest in people saying, how can I apply AI to my concrete business? How can I do freight forwarding, using LLMs and natural language processing for all of my invoices or whatever? How do you think about market sizing with these kind of vertical AI businesses, whether they're built on top of existing foundational models or maybe they're building their own? Does it have to necessitate a massive billion-dollar market, or do you feel like there can be success in these niches?
There's this saying that I think is very true. Niches make riches, right? Look, if you just look at the global economy, there are so many massive sectors out there that we inadvertently, I think, kind of diminish into like vertical SaaS, like how big can it get here in tech? But you have transportation, you have manufacturing, right? You have industrials, you have the financial sector, you have healthcare, like massive sectors within our economy that in some ways, are still early on that software eating the world kind of curve, right? And so, frankly, I spend less of my time thinking about market size because if you pick any industry out there, if you are the software that is in that daily workflow, right, in that core business function, or the core sort of functioning of a business day to day, like you can build a massive company. I think a lot more about value creation. How is this particular startup, right? Whether it's a vertical AI assistant or something that's automating a back office process, like how are you creating value for that customer? And if you can create a ton of value for 100 customers, right? and they can't live without your product, okay, then like you can figure out how to build a big company from there. And so I think we're going to see a lot of vertical AI software companies emerge from this time. I think what is different than before is spaces that were largely service oriented, right? Heavily services focused, right? Are going to get automated with AI and LLM assistance. And so we're going to take a lot of spaces that are kind of services and turn them into software. And I think that's really exciting. And I think that's going to happen within companies, sort of functions that are still the services layer within an enterprise, right? Whether that's compliance or FinOps or, customer service, right? But I think we're going to see that in very specific industries as well, whether it's contracting or real estate or, just name it, anything that still has sort of a paper workflow.
I think you're starting to see it already just as a function of post-COVID labor shortages. It is hard to hire good people. I think there's a generational impact of this. I've said this on the show before. We had our, kind of generation before us spent 25 years convincing people to get liberal arts degrees. And now we don't have enough people that have expertise in heavy industry and electricians and plumbing and these trades. And even beyond that work, they also then have to learn how to, let's say, run their own back office, run their own business, run their own small business. You're starting to see AI already step into those categories. Where I struggle sometimes as an investor is understanding like how capital efficiently can that business be built, right? Let's use small business as an example.
Small businesses will be one of the big winners. I think
so as well. Yeah. But unfortunately, I think for a long time, especially downstream investors have struggled with backing businesses that are selling to small businesses, primarily because of customer acquisition. It used to be very easy on Google and Instagram to target and recruit and hire. And we've had a couple companies in our portfolio actually use TikTok successfully, believe it or not, to get after small businesses. But the walls are closing in on customer acquisition. So I'm trying to understand where is the advantage now? Because I see the kind of, on one hand, small businesses being the best beneficiaries of having their own personal assistants. And then on the other hand, somebody that's building that tool still having to struggle to acquire those customers because the digital acquisition is tough and the ground and pound sales methodology kills margin. And so how do you thread that needle? I don't know if you found an answer in some of the companies that you've seen.
Well, if you do meet a company that has a totally different and effective approach to that, you should back them. Yeah. So I think go-to-market secret sauce is often what really makes companies, and it is hard to find and it's rare. Look, the thing that I think will really help companies that are selling to SMBs is just thinking of them as individual users, right? I think small business owners increasingly, are the generation that has grown up, right? Digitally native, right? Mobile native, right? They are more likely to try software products, right, within their own businesses because that's just what they've grown up with. And so I think the generational shift helps. I think what you still have to figure out is how do you reach them? And how do you captivate them, make it easy for them to use your products, right? And that's a marketing game. And so I'll leave it up to the pro marketers out there like you, Jay, to figure out how to create, viral campaigns and how to figure out product positioning. There are ways to do it. I don't think it's such a huge blocker, but, you better be solving a really urgent problem. Because the one thing that small businesses, medium-sized businesses just don't have time for is, frankly, products that are nice to have and not a must-have. So if you're solving a mission-critical problem and you have an effective solution for it, I think businesses are highly motivated to, frankly, adopt. And SMBs, unlike large enterprises, they don't have the benefit of hiring a lot of staff. They're chronically understaffed. And so I think that there will be maybe even a surplus, right, for small businesses that emerges from all the innovation in AI in the sense that, they'll probably be able to do the work of 100 people without having to hire them, right? And that is the promise of AI agents.
Yeah.
We're still early in that space, but just imagine a small business being able to do the work of, 30 people without having to hire them just by automating, all kinds of tasks. And I think we're going to see that.
The benefit I also, reiterate, I think there is like the time to decision is so much faster with SMBs as well. If you are really solving a problem and somebody can put down a credit card and buy it tomorrow, up to maybe $1,000 or a couple $1,000, like they will do that because they see that value in their business immediately. And so to me, the signals I look for are time to decision and how quickly you create value. So the quantum of value, as you were talking about, right? Like it has to be that much better, 100% true. But how long does this person have to use this product before they see the impact of it in their business? If you can do that inside of a month, inside of one pay period, that's really, really powerful.
That's a great point. Time to impact is very important. And ideally, when it comes to consumer companies, I often ask them, like, what's your moment of magic, right? The first interaction a user has within your product, has to be so magical that it makes them want to come back tomorrow, right? And you only get one bite at that apple, right? And if you don't, even within that first new user experience, but the same is true for SMBs, right? Maybe you get a little bit longer with a small business. Maybe you get a week or 2 weeks. That's your shot. Like, shoot your shot. You got to create impact for them or they're just not going to come back.
Yeah. Are there lessons from building and supporting companies in the mobile era that you're now applying to identifying companies that you want to back at NEA?
I think about the contrasts to the mobile era quite a bit because, I think the takeaways for me are, one, all the companies that we sort of associate with the mobile era didn't emerge in the first sort of year of the iPhone, right? And so it took many years, I think, for the Ubers and the Facebooks and some of the other sort of, key kind of mobile winners to emerge. And there was a great amount of experimentation, leading up to that point. So I think part of what I take away is also patience, knowing that as fast as AI is happening, and it is happening faster, it feels like it's faster and more dynamic than, any other technology shift that we've experienced. But also having that patience of knowing, we're still early. And so there are still great companies to build, and maybe some of them we haven't seen yet. I would say the other lesson is just, looking at broad categories, broad enduring categories that don't ever go away for opportunity, right?
Okay. Give me an example.
And so, I think relationships, consumer social, communication, travel, knowledge, right? And search. And so there's certain sort of enduring categories of consumer behavior that aren't going to go away, commerce and shopping, right? And so what are, looking for companies that are playing in really big end markets, and really big sort of parts of our either daily wallet share or parts of the economy. And that's true in the enterprise as well, right? Enterprise knowledge management, right? And looking at marketing, right? Sales, revenue functions, right? So what are the things that companies have to do and have to do really, really well? And how are, AI agents and this new generation of kind of LLM-powered software helping companies to do that more effectively? And so I think it's almost going back to this Jeff Bezos mentality of, he has this great quote, which I will totally butcher for your pod, but it's something like, people always ask us, what's next? What's the next innovation? What's the next disruption? Well, we're betting on the things that aren't going to change, which is customers, want convenient way to shop at the lowest price, right? And so adopting a little bit of that mentality of what will also endure, and therefore what are some massive categories of opportunity that are out there for the right company to reimagine.
Yeah, it's like this idea of everything new is old and everything old is new. And I see this a lot now because there's companies that I passed on or backed and didn't find success with at my last one, so 5-6 years ago, and they're coming back around. Maybe not the same founders, but the ideas are coming back around, this time with AI. And you have to kind of fight that, like, internal bias of, oh, I've seen this before and it didn't work, to say, well, maybe that was too early. And, we are actually seeing that shift, right? You talked about mobile. Platform shifts are a big part of category creation. And mobile as a platform created a whole new category of companies. AI and LLMs as a platform creating a new category of companies. And I find that internal struggle, I'm like doing therapy now, but find that internal struggle of like balancing this is new with, oh, I've seen this before. It's this iteration of it is new and it's different and it might work. But yeah, it's hard sometimes because a lot of these ideas have been tried before and not all of them were successful. Consumer is a great example of that, right? You've probably heard, this is not a new idea, but every consumer company maps into one of the 7 deadly sins, the biblical sins, right? And it's like, yeah, if you're dating apps and lust and greed and shopping, and you can kind of map it to every single one, which means they've all been tried before since the beginning of the dawn of the technology era, and yet they come back around with a new platform and a new shift. So I don't know how you think about that with ideas that you've seen before, or maybe your partners have seen before, and now you're in the room saying, wait, this time it's different,
We have a healthy debate.
Okay.
Because on the one hand, past experience really does matter, right? You want to understand why certain companies or certain products failed before and learn from that. Learning from failure is a really important part of how we evolve as an ecosystem. But pattern recognition can also kind of come to bite you in the, in the sense that you can miss things, if you're a little too jaded, if you're the person in the room who's like, we saw this before and it didn't work. And so I think it's important to have healthy debate around that. What's been remarkable to me is how many founders have come off the bench to build in this time. So founders who've started companies literally the last 12 to 18 months. Maybe they were part of a big tech company, maybe there were founders before and now they're coming back to, build a company for the second time. But a very common theme is there's this problem I've been wanting to solve for a really long time, or maybe even I tried a company before, to try to solve this problem and I just didn't think it was possible. But now with LLMs for the very first time, now with these new AI models, et cetera, like we can crack problems in user experiences that maybe just weren't possible before. And so rather than thinking about like old versus new, tried or not, it's sort of what are the new capabilities that generative AI allows us to have today, and what are problems we can now solve with those capabilities that maybe weren't solvable before. And then separately, a lot of what I think about is sort of what can we do that's maybe entirely new, or what are markets that can be democratized? Where's the TAM expansion going to happen? I think for AI, that's actually creative tooling.
Okay.
This idea that anyone can now be a creator, anyone can make a song, with the assistance of an AI, right? Or an AI model. Anyone can create an image. Anyone can now create a 3 to 5 second video or animation, right? We can clone voices and can think about all kinds of ways that we can essentially both bring the cost of video production and creative, self-expression, almost to zero, in a way where anyone can be a filmmaker, anyone can be a storyteller, anyone can be a meme creator too, whatever floats your boat. But just this idea that, we can make creative tooling so accessible and so affordable and so ubiquitous that in the same way that, Canva helped anyone to kind of become a social, make great social media content, right, for their channels, that we can now do that with video and image and music, and just maybe even create entirely new formats for self-expression with these models. And so that's really exciting. So try to think about like what's entirely new, where the market is just going to keep growing because we're democratizing certain opportunities for individual users. And then, what are spaces where all of a sudden, AI just unblocks, right, a solution. And so, you have to sort of, I think as an investor, a big part of the game is managing your own headspace.
Okay. Say more.
Well, what I mean by managing your own headspace is sort of there's a psychology to investing, right? The conversation I constantly have with myself is how to stay open-minded, how to be intellectually curious, but then rigorous at the same time, right? Because if the risk in ventures, if you've been around too long, maybe you have too much pattern recognition, right? Maybe you're a little jaded about what's possible. And if you haven't been around long enough, you just think everything is going to work, right? And you haven't really seen the failure patterns. And so I think a lot of it is just really understanding the founder's vision and what they are capable of versus projecting sort of what I want to see, but also thinking about, what might be possible in the future and not necessarily extrapolating in a linear way from what we're seeing today, but actually thinking about what could be fundamentally different 5-10 years from now. And that requires some imagination and curiosity.
Yeah, I think it requires some humility as well, right? And I think recognition of did this fail because it was the right idea and the wrong team? Was it the right team in the wrong market? I think it's always hard in hindsight. There's a great book by Annie Duke called Thinking in Bets, which I really love.
Great book.
Ever since I read it, it's probably one of the first books I read when I started my career in venture. And she talked about the importance of note-taking and deal memos. And, everybody talks about deal memos being important. And the way that she articulated to me really has established why I do them so rigorously in my career. It's a time capsule. It's something that you want to refer back to. Let's say you back the company at seed, they come back at Series A. You've locked that time capsule to say, everything we said we were going to do over the last 18 months. What did we do? What did we not do? Why did we do it? Why didn't we do it? If you just do it by memory, as humans, we write narratives for ourselves that kind of will solve our ego. And if you go back to that time capsule and it says, I made this bet because X, and X did not prove correct. Now I can move forward with was I wrong? Was the market wrong? Right? You have the ability to diagnose it, which you can't do if you just do it on pure memory. So I think there's that aspect of rigor and humility that has to go side by side. If you don't have one, it's hard to have the other.
I wish that I had a time machine where I could go back to every great tech company at its earliest inception and just observe what was happening then, because we talk so much about the big successes in tech. And those stories, they become so kind of sugar-coated and linear in the way that we talk about these companies it was overnight success. Really, it took the company 7 years to get to product market fit,
Right.
Or, gosh, they always dominated a category, but really that wasn't the case. And so I think if I wish for anything, in my current sort of role in life and ventures, if I could somehow have a time machine to just go back and sort of validate some of this, what happened to certain companies in the past and what was the root cause? Was it the market? Was it the team? There's so many different variables, I think, in startups, and it's hard to know, but we all do our best to learn from the past and yet at the same time not to project it too much onto the future.
Yeah. So on that topic of the past, before you were at NEA, you were angel investing. So you've been, backing companies for a little while. If you could go back to that first check you wrote or the first couple of checks you wrote and give Anne from whenever that was some advice, what would that advice be?
The biggest lesson I learned in angel investing, and I totally got this wrong, I think multiple times. So I say this to myself is, especially when you're the first check or one of the first checks, the only thing that matters is the person and the team. Back the best people that you know. I think early stage investing is so much about the person and their potential and their vision. That's what it comes down to. So don't overthink it is my advice. What I wish I would have known is don't overthink it. As an angel, it's a conviction check and back all the best people you've ever worked with. And if you do enough of that, and I have been lucky to be surrounded by some really amazing talent, just in my prior roles, I think if I had just written more checks into amazing people that I had just worked with before and I knew what they were capable of, I would have done really well.
Okay. One of the things that I also saw in your portfolio is your commitment to backing female founders and female founded teams. What is something you wish more female founders did sooner or that they don't do often enough?
It's a great question because there is an answer. And yet at the same time, I'm kind of like, I don't want to paint with too broad of a brush when it comes to female founders because it's not a monolithic group. Gender does not make a group, right? But I have had the privilege of, angel investing and working with a lot of incredibly talented, founders who happen to be women. And I think that's super important to me personally, important to the industry. I would say the number one thing is to unapologetically share and promote the mission and vision of your company. I don't know what it is, but many of the female founders I know, they're like incredible, but they're not out there pounding their chest and talking about how great their companies are. They're just doing the work. They're doing the work. And so my number one piece of advice and what I wish would change in the industry is just for female founders to have a bigger megaphone and to frankly not wait for it, but take it, create your own megaphone, promote your vision, your work, your team as loudly as you possibly can because you're already doing the work and, it deserves to be known and noticed. And I think as a share of voice, unfortunately, female founders just don't get the same share of voice in the industry as others do, and that needs to change.
Can I share an observation on that front? I see that actually with guests on my show as well. So I will reach out to, we have a lot of investors, we have founders on the show. I'll reach out to a male founder or investor, and I'll say, hey, I'd love to have you on the show. I saw you're doing this interesting thing. They go, yeah, I'm free Friday. You in town? I'll come by. When I reach out to a female founder or a female investor, and I'll put you on the spot a little bit. We had a pre-call, right? Do you know the number of male investors that has to have a pre-call? 5 out of 50. Every single female investor or female founder I've had on the call has said, let's hop on for 30 minutes before. I want to workshop what we're going to talk about. It's this interesting pattern that I've noticed. And I don't know if it's just, 75 episodes. It's just the pattern that I've seen. There's almost a inherent, who gives a shit when a male investor or male founder comes on? Yeah, if I bomb, it's okay. And every single female guest that I have on the show takes it absolutely seriously. And so I don't know if there's a lesson in that or just an observation that I'm sharing, but maybe it's that if you're getting that opportunity, don't overthink it. If somebody's inviting you on a show, if somebody's got a panel opportunity for you to be on, right, make sure it's strategic for you, make sure there's value there, but just go for it because your male counterpart is kind of in that, who gives a shit mode, and they'll be on, and that's who gets the press, and that's who gets the public recognition. And so
I always say yes. So
I do,
feel free to invite me to your panels, your conferences, your talk shows.
Yeah.
Technically, for compliance reasons, I do have to have some oversight of the content. So thank you for giving that to me. But I have a hypothesis on this, and I think, again, that because we all sort of live and work within an ecosystem, right? A lot of it is up to the individual. I really fundamentally believe in individual agency. We all have so much agency in tech. We're so privileged to work in this industry. We have such incredible access, opportunity. There's literally nothing stopping us on a relative basis to somebody somewhere else in the world, right? So appreciate that and take advantage of that. And that's all individual agency for what you want to do for yourself. That being said, I think my hypothesis is, the stakes are high for female leaders in this industry. And I think that's not lost, I think, on the women who work either in venture or maybe in the founder CEO seat. And so I think it says a lot about the ecosystem that there's still maybe some hesitation around being out front and in public with your views. And, we've seen prominent, women leaders kind of get taken down for that, especially female founders. And so what I hear privately from women investors and women founders that I know is there is this reluctance to sort of be out front because the takedowns have also been so public. And so, that's right out there.
You're absolutely
and so I think every leader just has to consider the risks and the upside of these opportunities. But I'm happy to speak my mind anytime
I'm glad you're here to do it. I'll ask you one more of these kind of, I wish people did more of this. You get pitched a lot. We get hundreds of pitches a month. One thing you wish more founders did better when pitching?
Number one thing, spend less time telling me about how you got here and a lot more time telling me about where you're going to go. So, you're in a 30-minute conversation. You should use 20 minutes of that time telling investors about your vision, what's going to happen next for your company, whether it's product, go-to-market, et cetera. Like, what is your plan for world domination? Tell me, because as an investor, that is what I'm underwriting. I'm underwriting where you're going to go in the next 5 to 10 years. I'm not here to, score your homework and give you credit for the last 18 months. So, the last 18 months, what you've executed, what your traction is, the team you've built, maybe even the origin story, they are important. Don't get me wrong. They're an indicator of what you can do going forward, right? They validate product market fit. They validate your ability to execute, but don't over-index for that because, again, it's not credit for prior work. We are backing what you're going to do over the next, 10 years and 18 months of execution, right? And so I think focusing more on what's happening next is really important. I think a lot of founders get that wrong by spending too much time wanting to tell you every part of their backstory.
Yeah. That's a mic drop. That's a great place for us to leave it. And that was fantastic. I think great advice for any founders that are listening and a lot of the investors that are looking at these categories in AI and going, I don't know where to start. I don't get the valuations. I don't get this. I think you and I are both believers that fundamentally this is a platform shift that is going to impact every industry, whether it's in consumer, whether it's in some of the industrial or hardline industries that we look at. This is the platform shift of at least the next decade, if not more. So I'm excited to be investing in it alongside you and want to thank you for joining me on the show.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Well, that's it for this week's episode of Climb by VSC. Thank you so much for watching and listening. My thanks to my friend Ann Bordetsky, partner at NEA, for joining me on the show this week. Did you know that you can watch as well as listen to every episode of Climb? Head on over to YouTube where we have new shows dropping every Wednesday morning and clips that we release every single day. You can keep on scrolling forever, so keep it going. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love for you to leave us a 5-star review on iTunes. And if you loved the episode, recommend a guest to us. We'd love to have them on the show. Well, that's it for now. Thank you so much for joining me on Climb. We'll see you all next week.